Okay, I think we're ready. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. The people here in the room and online. Very nice to have you here, and also big thanks to my panel for being here and taking time to be part of this. So my name is Marcus Williams. I'm the head of MIGA's energy practice. MIGA is one of the two private sector arms of the World Bank Group. And our job is to catalyze private investment into emerging markets across all sectors, and I'm leading the energy practice. So we've got a great panel here today, and the question is to discuss what do we do about the fact that we need more projects, we need more energy projects. We know that the problem is extreme, is as urgent as ever. We've got about 750 million people around the world who don't have any access to power today, and many more who have access only to unreliable, expensive and dirty power. So it's a big problem. And we of course it's not just an access problem, there's a climate problem too. So how do we get more projects coming into the system, more generation capacity into the system? And the thing is that there's a lot of ambition and intent and money out there to get things to happen. And a lot of governments that are clamoring to get more projects and more capacity online, but they get stuck. And I think Astrid mentioned to me earlier, I think the conversion rate is generally figured to be around 10%, where projects that are arriving from inception through to the point where they've gone through final investment decisions and financial close to commissioning and operations, it's about a 10% success rate, which is sort of intolerable. So the question is, why is this happening, and how do we address those problems? So I've got a great panel. I've got two people here who are from the project preparation facility TA side. Astrid Manroth from the Global Infrastructure Facility, Leria Aranawati from the Africa Legal Support Facility. And then I've got two people from the development side, from the sponsor investment side, Mikhail Klassenhoek from Cube Energy and Akhil Bora from EMEA Power. So I guess turning right to it, let me ask each of you to introduce yourselves and your organizations and tell us a little bit about what you're doing. And Astrid, let me start with you.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. And thank you to MIGA for convening this important discussion. We've had some great climate finance announcement this week, and which is very encouraging. But of course, spending those billions in announcements really starts with project preparation and creating the pipeline for it. And as those of us who are practitioners know, that is actually a lot easier said than done. So great that MIGA is putting the spotlight on this. I'm Astrid Manroth. I'm the head of the Secretariat of the Global Infrastructure Facility. The Global Infrastructure Facility was set up in 2014 as a G20 initiative with the objective to help emerging markets governments prepare bankable infrastructure projects for private investment. So we work across the MDB system through our 10 MDB technical partners. So we're housed at the World Bank, but we actually work with all of the MDBs, EBRD, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, and others to provide the support services, advisory services to these governments, always with a view to really create infrastructure as an asset class and also raise private capital mobilization for infrastructure. So energy is of course a key sector where we see a lot of demand. Actually, transport and energy are the sectors where the Global Infrastructure Facility is seeing the highest demand. We have a global portfolio in all the regions, and we have over the years prepared close to 170 projects, supported the preparation of 170 projects, of which 16 have reached financial close. So again, that magic 10% is very consistent with what we are seeing as well. We are also mainstreaming climate in our operations. I'm very pleased to say we follow the joint MDB methodology on climate, and we look at our approvals on a 36 months rolling basis, and 93% of those are actually climate smart. So we're embedding climate in everything what we do. And just this week at COP28, we also launched the Carbon Action Forum, which is actually a partnership initiative with the World Bank's Climate Change Group and the Partnership for Market investment facilitation to bring together buyers and sellers for emission reduction credits from MDB operations, starting with creating emission reductions from World Bank operations. So we really try to build the ecosystem, and also by doing so through collaborative approaches, country platforms, but also globally connecting to the private sector. We have a standing private sector advisory committee, which has members with jointly 18 trillion in assets under management across international banks, but also institutional investors, and also a growing share of local investors from emerging markets. So thank you for having us, and I look forward to the discussion.
No, thank you for being here. And maybe just before I go on down the line, can you just explain a little bit about what a typical preparation activity might look like?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So basically, we come in once the investment climate is in place and the regulatory framework has been created, often with the support of other partners like the Public-Private Infrastructure Advisory Facility at the World Bank or ESMAP. And then once the government has identified a pipeline of projects, we can come in and help prepare that pipeline. It can be pre-feasibility studies, environmental, social, technical, feasibility studies, the same, and then also really providing structuring advice, supporting governments, often in collaboration with Africa Legal Support Facility, really in preparing bankable project documentation, tendering documents, running the tendering process. So taking the entire prep from beginning to the end. And then, as I mentioned at the end, also then once the project has been made bankable, connect with potentially interested investors.
Right, so really the full gamut, really, going from...
Yeah, exactly.
And I should have said maybe at the beginning that I guess, the thesis in a way is that, there are all these projects that are out there that are trying to get themselves, going from the start line to the finish line and get themselves to the point where they're actually built, constructed and operating. But there are so many challenges that come along, some of them you expect and many that you don't. And getting past those hurdles is a real issue, and there are a lot of organizations that are out there to try to help. But I think that there is a knock on that world, on that community, and I should say that your two organizations are, shining examples of this not being the case. But the knock is that there are a lot of TA providers and project preparation facility providers who are sort of waiting. They're hesitant to jump in at the moment when they're most needed. Because like everybody else, they're waiting to see, is this a real project? Is it viable? Is it going to make it? And we don't want to waste our time and our resources on things that are just going to fall away along the way. But that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, of course. It's a cycle. So anyway, and as I said, I think GIF and ALSF are shining examples of organizations that are very responsive and quick to come in. And in fact, Leria, we've just brought you into one of the deals that we're working on in Africa. In fact, I think I can say this with Cube. And I think from the moment we called you to the moment you got all going was about 2 weeks, which was fantastic. So let me ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about ALSF and like how do you get involved and what's the sort of typical activity for you? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus, and thanks to Mega for facilitating this discussion. My name is Leria Dinitwe. I am Legal Counsel and Energy Sector Lead at the African Legal Support Facility. We are an international organization that's hosted by the Africa Development Bank, and were established in 2008 in response to a call from the African Ministers of Finance for the need to set up a transactional support facility to governments to enable them get to equal negotiation footing with private sector developers. There was a realization that private sector developers have the means and the opportunity to engage the best-in-class advisory, legal, technical, and financial to negotiate their side of the projects, and which was not the case for the African governments. And so what we do is level the negotiation field for these governments as they engage with the private sector. Our mandate covers 4 sectors, so energy, which is why we're here, sovereign finance, infrastructure and PPPs, and natural resources and extractives. From the energy perspective, our mandate covers the entire technology chain, and we also cover the entire in electricity value chain. So electricity development, electricity transmission, and electricity distribution, provided that there is private sector engagement. We are demand-driven, so we respond to the needs of the governments, and which means we meet them at the point of need. Sometimes the need is to formulate a short-term generation expansion plan so that they get a coherent plan of how to develop the energy resources. Oftentimes they have identified a particular resource that they want to implement, and what we do is come in to help them develop the tender, negotiate the documentation, help them with implementing the conditions precedent to financial close, and basically getting them from start to finish. Sometimes they've already developed a project, they've signed the project documentation, but they're not certain about the profitability or investability of the project, and so we come in to provide a red flag analysis of what should have been done and what can be done to improve the project. So we very much meet them at their point of need.
Thank you very much. So let me turn now to the investors, the ones who are actually doing all the work and making the impact. And Mikhail, let me start with you. Tell us about Cube, and maybe also if you could describe from your perspective, you're developing a lot of different projects in several different countries at the moment. What are the kinds of challenges that you would typically experience?
Thanks. Thanks, Marcus. Yeah, my name is Mikhail. I'm the director of East Africa for Cube Energy. We're a small Norwegian renewable energy company, but we have big ambitions. We specialize in developing off-grid renewable energy projects in fragile, sort of hard-to-reach areas in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically Central African Republic, Somalia, and South Sudan. And I'll speak specifically about a project that we're getting ready to commission. So we've been working on this solar project in Somalia, and we're getting ready to commission this in January. We developed this in partnership with the government of Southwest State, MIGA, and also Cross Boundary Energy, who's our financing partner. Maybe I'll start a little bit, I'll just give a few facts about the project, and then we can get into some of the challenges that we've experienced. So this is a hybrid solar power plant. It's got 2.8 megawatts of solar and 4.8 megawatt hours of battery storage. This is probably some technical language that not everyone understands, but CapEx to build, the total cost to build this facility is around $7.4 million. So it's a pretty big project. And our model is quite unique in the sense that we're operating in these very difficult areas. We need to find a client that's going to be bankable and make the project bankable. And so we always work with the UN as our sort of main off-taker. So in Somalia, it's the UN, the United Nations Office or Support Office for Somalia, that is our main client. We have a power purchase agreement with them. But we have plans in the next year or so, once we commission, to actually expand distribution and start providing power to the city of Baidoa. So we started developing this project in 2018, and we're looking to commission this in January 2024. So this actually gets to one of the first challenges that we really deal with. Working in these fragile states is extremely complicated, and developing projects like this takes a lot of work. For a small company like ours, we have very limited capital and very limited resources. So this initial stage in the product development phase is the most expensive and risky for us. It's taken 5 years to develop this one project, and it took 3 years to reach financial close, which some people might say is quick, but for us, a small company with limited money, it's actually very, very difficult. So it means that we had to dedicate 3 years of our time. We had to cover around $250,000 of costs up front before even knowing whether the project was going to be successful and before getting our first payment. So this type of lack of capital means that we, as a company, can really only focus on 1 or 2 projects at a time. And we also don't have the resources that we would need to speed up the development process. So capital is probably, access to this kind of capital at the early stage is something that we really struggle with. And what we've seen is there's a lot of support out there, but these support funds are quite nervous coming in at the early stage because they're scared of backing a project that might not be bankable in the long run. The second challenge which we face a lot is that the countries that we operate in, they tend to have really weak regulatory sort of frameworks, and they have poorly defined land tenure and property rights. And then most of the government counterparts that we work with, they also don't have a lot of capacity or sort of experience working with these types of legal questions. So what this means for us is it can be really difficult to figure out licensing requirements as we start to develop the solar project. It's hard to get land for us to build the facility on. And it's also hard to negotiate concessional agreements. And we've also found that the lack of sort of experience with these government counterparts, it can make it a bit difficult for them to understand sort of international legal frameworks that they need to comply with. And then the last thing I'll say before I hand it back over is that, building relationships and establishing trust with these government counterparts is probably one of the most important things that we need to do to develop these projects. And you can imagine that this takes a lot of time. Unfortunately, these countries often have quite weak institutions, and so if there's ever a change in government or there's a change in staff, which happens all the time, there's no institutional memory to fall back on. And that means that we kind of have to start from scratch all over again, building those relationships. And we've actually found that this specific issue of building the relationships and not having some sort of consistent memory of what we've been doing is one of the leading causes of delays when it comes to developing these types of projects. So I'll stop there. I think those are three good sort of main challenges that we face during these kind of early stages of project development.
No, thanks, Mikhail. I mean, that certainly resonates for me. And as I look across our portfolio across the world and our pipeline, I mean, those are three absolutely clear themes that run through probably not just this sector either. I think that they're quite universal. So Akil, let me turn to you. So we've got Mikhail here from Cube, which is in a sense a smaller company that's doing off-grid work by and large. You're sort of the other end of the spectrum. Amir is a huge global company, one of the fastest growing renewable energy companies in the world. I think you've got about 1 gigawatt already under operations and a pipeline, I think, of around 6 gigawatts in many different countries. And so you have very different, not only do you have a different sort of experience set, but also, I think, different leverage as a company in terms of coming in with your sort of might and your resources to get things done. And yet, I know that you too face problems getting projects up and running and moving ahead, right?
No, thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this session. I resonate with my panelists that it's a very important topic. The other day, I was on a panel discussing about how to create pipeline of bankable projects, and I think this is the key. The preparation of the projects is the key to create that bankable or pipeline of the bankable projects. So my name is Akil Bohra. I am Senior Director Project Development with AMIA Power. AMIA Power is a Dubai-based renewable power developer. In terms of technology, we have multiple projects either under construction or operations in solar PV projects, wind projects, and the battery storage projects. In terms of new verticals on technology side, we are now looking into green hydrogen and water desalination as the two new verticals. In terms of geography, AMIA stands for Africa, Middle East, and Asia, literally, and we target emerging markets in these geographies. Africa, by large, is our focus market. We are currently in 20 countries in Africa, and with around 1.6 gigawatt in construction or operations. We are proud to say that we are one of the largest IPP developer in Africa today. In terms of new markets, we are also looking at Central Asia as our another stop. We are looking at countries of Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan mainly. And probably we may also be soon looking into Turkey as our new market. We have, as I said, 1.6 gigawatt in construction and operation. In addition to that, we have around 3 gigawatt of very advanced pipeline, again, mainly in Africa and beyond. And then if you combine hydrogen to it, we are looking at somewhere around 6 gigawatt of pipeline under development. As I said, this topic is very, very key in terms of creating those bankable projects. When I look at the preparation for the projects, I can divide it into two categories, where one which requires some capital to do the preparation, and one which actually does not require capital. And let me start with the second one, because at times, the geographies which we work on, it is always difficult for the governments to find capital and allocate capital for development of projects, especially if it is not going into any kind of, a big tender or something where they can afford to kind of, put that cost back into the projects. So when we look at that particular area, the key which we have identified working like 6 years with various government is the engagement of the various government ministries or government departments. Now, what we have seen is that there is a very limited dialogue between the various ministries and departments. Typical project development requires at least involvement of 6 to 7 ministries, name it a Ministry of Energy, a Ministry of, a ministry which owns the land, the Ministry of Finance typically because there are guarantees involved. Then there is an environmental ministry and things like that, civil aviation ministry. We have seen that when we start discussing the IPP project with the Ministry of Energy or the department within the Ministry of Energy, and then when we have to go out and get the permits and licensing from various other ministries, they sometimes don't know at all about the project. And that takes a lot of time in terms of getting them educated about that this is a private project, this is not a government project, it is not an EPC, it's an IPP, we are taking most of the risk and things like that. And get to the stage where we can get then the final permit or license from that particular ministry. I'll give you an example here. In one of the projects, a mega project which we are developing, because of the global market conditions, it happens so that we found that the tariff which we have agreed with the government was no more economical viable. So we went to the government and started discussing with them as to what can be done. First, we asked them for a extra time, which they provided to us. And then we started looking at something where we don't touch the tariff, because that becomes a huge issue, and what we can do. And we figured out that this was a wind project, that we can increase the, the hub height, which is allowed in that area, and can get at least 4 to 5% extra generation, which can, make the project to a great extent economical viable. And we had this discussion for some time with the government. It took us almost 5 months, 6 months to convince them, and we got that approval. When we started then working on the project, happily that, okay, we have got this now, and the project is economical viable. And we go to the Ministry of Environment, and they say, no, nobody has come to us and discussed this. You're allowed to only do 120 meter, you cannot go to 180 meter. How wide? We have never been involved. So the two things happens. One is obviously that causes the delay in the project, but also there is a kind of an, I may use the word ego comes into play, where that ministry feels that, oh, nobody consulted us, and we are not important enough to be consultant. Now, these situations do arise. Another example, a very classic case is land. Now, land in these countries, as my colleague here, Mikhail has, I'm sure that experience in many of these places. I give a classic example in one of the countries where we are now developing a 50 megawatt wind project. It's a wind project on the top of the mountain range. And typically you will find that these areas are not something which is, agricultural, so you don't find the farmers there. But to our surprise, we found that even those mountains were all, plots were allocated to the private parties. For a 50 megawatt project, we had to negotiate with 32 land parcel owners to first get them on board, sign the individual lease agreements with them, and then convert that land from an agricultural land to a commercial land. Now, I believe that these kind of things, when the government is well aware of that these projects are being discussed, and if government can work and do a preparation in advance, which doesn't require much capital on the government side, to at least identify those plot of lands, either get it, free from those landowners or get an agreement with those landowners. And not only that, but also facilitate the conversion from an agricultural land to commercial land so that when the investors comes, they can move fast on that. Another example is, which is a bit broader, where government needs to also, and probably the help from the multilateral institutions or the bigger or developed world can come into picture, is the Forex. We are now, especially in our case where we are doing larger projects and utility scale projects, the project can be bankable on everything else except for the forex availability in the country. And this is now a new challenge which we are facing more often in most of the countries. And I can understand that some of this is coming because of the last 2 years of difficult time which the entire world has seen. So if the institutions can come and create some kind of facilities for them to at least provide the central banks with a facility which they can tap on to get dollars, that can make those projects bankable. And based on that, the projects can move faster. I think I'll stop there and maybe we can discuss more about it with the panel.
No, thank you very much. I mean, I completely agree with all that, and I think, you know, you're right that you know, we're talking already about the fact that it's hard enough to get projects across the line. It's even more hard in this environment, despite the urgency that is, you know, it's ever ratcheting up.
Correct.
But just with all of the issues that the world and the host countries are facing, whether it's, you know, interest rates, whether it's inflation, supply chain issues, I mean, obviously climate issues, conflict, I mean, you know, energy prices, there's a lot going on, and obviously foreign exchange is a really big issue. Well, look, I mean, I think we're already getting far into our allotted time, but maybe just switching gears and quickly to talk about some of the things where, despite all these impediments, we've seen things work. And Laria, maybe I can ask you to go first. And by the way, it makes me realize, you know, I think, Mikhail, what you were saying about turnover in the government, so, I mean, you're so right. It's turnover everywhere. But, and Akhil, what you're saying, I mean, you know, ministries being sort of upset that they haven't been consulted. The human aspect of all of this is really important. But I think what ALSF is doing, where you're sort of sitting with the governments, is so important because, you know, you're a trusted partner to them. You're clearly coming in on their side to help with the negotiation process, but also you represent continuity. I think you can bring some of that continuity. I think a lot of our institutions can help do that. GIF certainly as well. But can you talk a little bit about some examples of where you've seen your products, your interventions coming in and helping actually really unlock things in a way that maybe could be replicated elsewhere?
Yeah, sure. I think if I could just start from, I think, the problem here, because I entirely agree with Mikhail and Akhil that this is a real life issues as to why that number of 10% is as low as 10%, right? If I would categorize the problems, I would categorize them as one, structural, and two, institutional. And some of them, they've, you know, have been articulated very well. Structure in a sense that most of the time, this is the first IPP that's being developed. The institutional capacity is prior to this IPP coming on is you know, projects being financed and implemented off the government's balance sheet. And so the twist from that to an IPP development, an IPP risk allocation, an IPP financing requirements perspective is not a day's event. What we do, and speaking to some of my colleagues here, is that part of what we do is sitting with the government and explaining the fact that because this is not going to be banked on the balance sheet, because this is going to be developed using capital markets, you know, the lenders will genuinely require you to, you know, to guarantee, to provide some form of liquidity support, to guarantee that they're able to repatriate their profit, to provide undertaking that the land is not going to be expropriated. And so it's just enabling them, or what we do is provide them capacity to be able to understand these concepts from a commercial perspective and make the right decisions, which are fair and balanced, not necessarily skewed to one or the other, but just for the development of the project or in good faith of the project. And so typically, even when it's not the first IPP, it's the first time they're encountering that technology. It could be green hydrogen, it could even just be solar, but that's the first time they're having that kind of technology. So understanding the nuances of how do we fit this intermittent renewable resource with our base load? How does it tally to make sure that we still have a stable grid? All these are considerations that might not be the IPP's piece problem or issue, but they have to be considered and they're critical for the project to progress. And even when the technology has been encountered, sometimes the sheer scale of the new project is nothing they've seen before. Probably they're dealing with 10 megawatts and you have a gigawatt, solar project. So it's the novelty of these developments that require the government to take a bit of time to understand the risk allocation and to make sure that they're making the right decision for them. But that's just structural. Then we have the institution. Mikhail pointed to it, and I entirely agree. We do, for at least the African continent, our institutions are not developed enough to withstand the periodic election tide. So there's often change in priorities, change in personnel, change in the leadership, and that impacts what should ideally be a seamless project development stage. Obviously, we also have to be mindful that it's not even when there's some sort of so in an ideal situation, you'd have a long-term generation or transmission plan that then from which short-term generation plans are implemented, that are coherent, that are known, and that are planned for. But that's not the issue. We need every megawatt as far as possible, as quickly as possible. I mean, out of the 800 million people on the continent that don't have access to electricity, 600 million of those reside in Africa. So. And even those that have electricity, the tariff is too high to industrialize. So we don't have the opportunity or the luxury of having taking a very long-term view and implementing a long-term view. So there's competing interest even among the developers that are coming on. So what we advise the governments is try and regularize what you have. Have a short-term formulate a short-term generation strategy, a short-term transition strategy, and try and implement them in a coherent fashion. Evaluate the unsolicited proposals for what they are. Try and get market assessments through procurements for these types of procurement, for these types of energy projects that you're trying to develop. But also, most importantly, we do provide the assistance. And we're a legal facility, primarily, but we did realize that it's not enough to provide legal capacity because project development is legal in nature, yes, but there's also commercial considerations, there's also technical considerations. So what we do is we provide a comprehensive suite of advisory to assist the governments be on equal footing, help them understand the nuances of what Mikhail and Akil were discussing, with the hope that would give them the confidence to progress the projects in a manner that's faster than what we have now.
Okay, thank you. And Astrid, maybe the same question to you too. Some examples of where it has worked well in the past and things that we can replicate and scale up.
Thank you, Marcus, and really with a view to looking forward, right? How do we move and how do we get to scale? And maybe two thoughts here. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin, but we really need a system approach, and we need also more collaboration across the system. So what do I mean by system approach? I mean, bankable infrastructure projects, they really start at the planning level. So if we stay in the energy sector, helping governments sort of do the least cost energy sector development plan, helping them develop also then the regulatory environment that is conducive to attracting private sector investment. But even before that, help governments understand which projects lend themselves to private finance and which will still require public finance. I think that's also a skill that needs to be further supported and developed in the markets that we work in. And then once we get to the transaction level, I mean, bring all the experience and the tools to bear that we have heard already in the panel, but then also looking at how can we get to replicability. So how can we, in the process, for example, of doing the first IPP or the first energy access project, how can we standardize as part of that project to get to a programmatic approach over time, so that the second to the 10th project will go a lot faster. The first project by its very nature always takes time. For example, Global Infrastructure Facility, PPIIF, have worked with Dakar and Senegal to put in place the first 100% electric bus rapid transit system. That took 7 years to prepare. It was new, it took a lot of time, but it's there now. It's actually the first clean bus rapid transit in the continent. We have learned a lot, so now we're working with other partners to see how can we replicate that experience and do then the next round faster. Or to give you another example, in Brazil, we are working with a number of municipalities on energy efficient street lighting. So street lighting is, can be up to 70% of cities' budgets actually, and replacing the old lamps with LED efficient street lighting is a significant progress. But there we have partnered up not only with IFC, but also with the local bank, Caixa. And again, brought in standardization into the process. So, GIF helped support the first 12 municipalities, but Caixa now learned how to structure these deals and is now rolling it out across the country in hundreds of municipalities. So that's what we're also trying to do, is like through that first intervention, be catalytic so that, we don't always have to be there, but we build the capacity both in the governments, but also then in the local financial ecosystem to take this forward.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I think she just said something that was the replication is really critical to bridging the time gap. And so what we do for the energy sector is once we help the government develop a project, we also develop a toolkit, and this toolkit is both procurement and the project implementation documents. And with the hope that once an investor of a similar technology comes in, they do have a toolkit that they could just roll out in hopefully the quicker time from the first time. So yes, replication is important.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, for so many reasons, right? I think that the goal in a way is to try to learn the lessons, be able to get things done quicker and faster, but also in a way to try to sort of commoditize these transactions, because amongst other things that also changes the capital requirements. It allows development capital to be exited and longer term, including, by the way, DFI capital coming from the public sector, but to bring in the commercial side, and then for development capital to get taken out, and ultimately, ideally, to move these transactions and the financing of them into the capital markets. And then that's where we can really finally get from the billions to trillions agenda. So yes, I fully agree. Standardization, commoditization, replicability, speed. Akhil, from your perspective, and I think we're short on time now, but just, what have you seen that has worked well that we could potentially replicate?
Meaning there are quite a few examples where meaning things we found that there were problems and we went back to the government and things have worked. I gave an example earlier about increasing the tip height without changing the tariff. On a similar front, and just being aware of the time, just tell you in few words that, for example, we have gone to the government to do increase the tenor of the PPA. Again, this is something doesn't affect them on the tariff side, and we take the risk of the longevity of the project. That helps us. In cases where we have found, unfortunately, that the government utility is not credible enough, and the bankers or lenders are asking for some kind of external support, we have gone to create things like escrow accounts where money from some of the key users can come directly, and then first the project is paid and the money goes to the government. In some cases we found somebody in between which is more bankable, and we have an offtake agreement with them, and then they on their part through different arrangements or insurance arrangements sell to the third parties. These are a few examples. On the technical side, now as we talk more and more about renewable with these government, we find that they are finding problem with the intermittency, and grid is becoming problem. So from our side, and when we conceptualize the project, we ourselves are going to the government and telling them that you must have a component of BESS associated with it. So we are proposing it from our side, making sure that when we have this project and being discussed, the intermittency part is being taken care of. So things like that we have taken into consideration to move the project faster on the government side. An example of a problem which I highlighted earlier on the various departments or ministry not being aware of, on a bigger project, on a hydrogen project, we know that this is a massive project and requires a lot of capital. What we have done is that we have urged the government to create a kind of an working group, where they have then brought in people from different ministries. This is a new industry. Even the regulations and the laws and bylaws are not yet written properly. So we knew that, and we said that this is important, rather than developing it with just the utility and then figuring out what to do with the rest later on. Let them come on board now. And we give them also some kind of, provide them an incentive to be on board in terms of like giving a share of the project to them so that they feel that they're getting something from the project as various ministries, whether it is land, whether it is the port authorities, or whether it is, the environmental agency. So this is what we have done in one of the case, and we see that this has worked very well. And everybody around the key stakeholders have the same understanding of what we are trying to implement there. So these are some of the examples.
That's a great example. Thank you. And Mikhail, I think same question to you. I mean, what have you seen that's really worked well, and things that we can benefit from the lesson learned and try to do it again?
Yeah. I'll start with the capital. So NORAD, we work quite closely with NORAD, the Norwegian organization, and they have actually offered a scheme with us now where once the project reaches financial close, they'll actually reimburse us for 50% of the sort of upfront development costs that we put into it. So even though the funds are coming after financial close, it's still very beneficial to us. And those kind of schemes could be really, I think, useful to replicate. The other really sort of successful, I think, engagement with us has been working with MIGA. So MIGA has come in and provided a guarantee for our project, but the guarantee was crucial in itself, right, to be able to lock in the capital, the private sector capital. But I think MIGA has actually gone beyond just providing the guarantee. They've sort of become a partner. You helped us work through some regulatory and licensing questions that we were really struggling with. And I think you also just gave us, a small company, credibility. And you kind of became this consistent partner that is needed there to sort of keep things moving along. And I think sort of, help us maybe avoid some interference with the government and sort of move the project forward. And so I think those types of having, especially for a company like us, a small company like us, having a consistent partner that has credibility in the space and can have some clout to help move things forward has been really useful. And I think, I know that we talked about this earlier, but starting to think about MIGA having a role beyond just providing guarantees, I think would be really interesting, because I think you have that kind of power and influence. So I think those are two, interesting sort of successes that have helped us out.
I should probably have said at the beginning that, both the mayor and Cube are clients of ours and highly valued clients of ours. And it's nice for you to say that. I mean, look, and I think for us, I think we see that these are complicated ambitions that everybody has. And there are a lot of different organizations and foundations and companies and people all trying to make this happen. Coordination is really, really important. And I think, for one, we feel that we're able to help to try to connect some of these dots, and we all need each other to succeed, sort of thing. And clearly we need both of you and your companies, because you really are what it's all about. But we're, standing behind you, and if we can be, it's like a rugby scrum, we need to be locked into each other, and then we've got some momentum. But look, I think with that we have to draw it a close, I'm afraid. And I just want to thank you all very much indeed. It's a really interesting conversation. I think, by the way, that this panel is important. These conversations are important, but to be really important, I think to have some sort of lasting value. My ambition coming out of this is to be walking even more tightly in lockstep with GIF, with the LSF. I mean, obviously with the mayor and with Cube, but to be there to be sort of just a toolkit of solutions to problems that come up, both those that we know are coming and those we don't know are coming, but we can be sure will be coming. So with that, thank you all very much. And also let me just lastly thank the government of the UAE for hosting us here and hosting COP. And thank you all for being here as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.